Have you ever wondered how a single comment could spark a storm of insecurities and turn someone's life upside down? That's exactly what happened to Letitia. Ever since she was a child, she knew that baking wasn't just a skill. It was a legacy, passed down through generations of her family. The small artisanal bakery she inherited was more than a business. It was a place where stories were told through the scent of fresh bread and the warmth of an oven that had been in her family for decades. But when she met Henrique, an ambitious man obsessed with status and success, she never imagined that the very thing that defined her could become something he looked down upon. And so begins a journey filled with family conflicts, betrayals, and emotional transformation where love, dignity, and self-respect are put to the ultimate test. At first, Letitia thought she had found the love of her life. Henrique was charming, affectionate, full of admiration for her hard work, or at least that's what he claimed. He spoke of how much he respected her determination, how inspiring it was that she had taken a small, simple bakery and turned it into a well-known establishment in the town. He made promises, shared dreams, and made her believe that they were a team. But time has a way of revealing what's hidden. As the months passed, admiration turned into subtle criticism. Maybe you should modernize this place, something more sophisticated, more in tune with the market. At first, these seemed like harmless suggestions, but soon they became small daggers aimed at the very essence of what she held dear. Have you ever lived with someone who, little by little, started feeling ashamed of what they once claimed to love about you? It's a slow, suffocating feeling, creeping in before you even realize it. Letitia tried to ignore the way Henrique's expression changed whenever he saw her covered in flour, greeting customers in the same apron her mother used to wear when baking birthday cakes for the neighborhood. But his silent disapproval was impossible to miss. And so, while the bakery flourished, the distance between them only grew. The more success she achieved, the further she seemed to drift from the man she thought she knew. And you might be wondering, why didn't she see the signs sooner? The truth is, love often makes us blind to reality. Letitia kept justifying Henrique's remarks, believing he only wanted to push her towards success. On good days, he would still praise her creativity, telling her she had a special touch that no one could replicate. But on bad days, he reminded her that a small-town bakery could never be considered a real business in the world of high-class entrepreneurs. And so, little by little, Letitia started molding herself to fit his expectations, trying to hold on to the love she thought they shared. But life has a way of revealing the truth when we least expect it, and what was coming next would prove that these small humiliations were just the tip of the iceberg. The shift in Henrique's behavior was so gradual that Letitia almost didn't notice it at first. He still held her hand in public, still spoke to her with that soft tone that had once made her feel safe. But there were moments, fleeting yet sharp, where his true feelings slipped through. It was in the way he hesitated before introducing her to certain people, the way his smile faltered whenever she proudly spoke about her bakery. "You work too hard," he would say, brushing flour off her cheek with a forced chuckle. "You should focus on bigger things, not just pastries." His words seemed harmless, but they left a bitter aftertaste, because deep down she knew he didn't see her work as something valuable. At first, Letitia made excuses for him. Maybe he was just stressed. Maybe he didn't mean it the way it sounded. She had seen it happen before, how people from wealthier backgrounds looked at her with polite condescension, as if her business was just a quaint little hobby rather than a real profession. But it was different when it came from Henrique. He was supposed to be on her side, and yet every time she mentioned a new recipe or an idea to improve the bakery, he barely reacted. "That's nice," he would mumble, distracted, before quickly steering the conversation toward his own career, his ambitions, his next big deal. Slowly but surely, she stopped bringing up her dreams around him. One evening, after an exhausting day at work, Letitia prepared a special dinner for them. She wanted to celebrate. Her bakery had just been featured in a local magazine, a recognition she had worked tirelessly to achieve. She set the table, lit a candle, and waited for Henrique to arrive. But when he finally walked in, he barely acknowledged the effort she had put in. Instead, he sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "You won't believe the ridiculous meeting I had today," he groaned. Letitia smiled, trying to push down the disappointment. "Actually, I have some news too," she said, handing him the magazine. He barely glanced at it before setting it aside. "That's great, babe," he said absent-mindedly, already checking his phone. The moment was gone. It was in that instant that something shifted inside her. It wasn't just about the bakery anymore. It was about the way he made her feel. Invisible, small, as if her hard work, her passion, her entire identity was nothing more than a minor detail in his world. She sat there, watching him text away, and felt a sadness she couldn't quite put into words. Maybe, deep down, she had known all along. Maybe the signs had been there from the very beginning, but she had chosen to ignore them, because the truth was painful, and facing it meant accepting that the man she loved might not love her the way she deserved. As days turned into weeks, Letitia found herself trapped in an invisible cage, one built from unspoken words and quiet disappointments. The bakery was thriving, yet the joy she once felt in her work was fading under the weight of Enrique's dismissiveness. Every time she tried to share a small victory with him, a new client, a successful event, a recipe that sold out, his response was always lukewarm. "That's nice," he would say, barely lifting his eyes from his phone or laptop. It was as if her achievements were background noise, unworthy of his full attention. The warmth that once existed between them had turned into something colder, more distant, and the worst part was that she didn't know how to fix it. But the real cracks began to show when Henrique started avoiding the bakery altogether. At first, he made excuses. Too much work, long meetings, business trips that couldn't be postponed. Then, it became more obvious. He would change the subject whenever someone mentioned the bakery in conversations. If a friend asked about Letitia's business, he would give a vague response and quickly redirect the focus back to himself. It was subtle, but it stung. And when Letitia confronted him about it, his answer was always the same. "You're overthinking things. I support you, but it's just not my world, not his world." The words rang in her ears long after he had said them, settling in her chest like a heavy weight she couldn't shake off. One evening, she overheard a conversation that confirmed her worst fears. Henrique was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones, but she caught just enough to understand. "No, she runs a small bakery. Nothing big," he laughed. "Yeah, she enjoys it, but it's not really serious business." Letitia froze, her heart pounding. She had suspected it, felt it in his actions, but hearing it out loud was something else entirely. She wanted to storm in and demand an explanation, to ask him how he could belittle her work so easily. But instead, she stood there in silence, staring at the man she thought she knew, realizing that he would never truly respect what she had built. That night, as she lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, Letitia felt something break inside her. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was grief, the slow, aching kind that comes when you realize you've been lying to yourself. She had been waiting for things to change, for Henrique to see her the way she wanted to be seen, but the truth was staring her in the face. He never would. And the worst part? She wasn't sure she had the strength to walk away. The morning after overhearing Henrique's conversation, Letitia moved through her bakery like a ghost, her body performing each task mechanically, while her mind replayed his words over and over again. The smell of freshly baked bread, once a source of comfort, now felt like a painful reminder of how little Henrique valued everything she had built. Customers came and went, offering warm compliments and joyful smiles, but she could barely acknowledge them. It was as if a fog had settled over her thoughts, numbing her to the very thing that once gave her purpose. How had she allowed herself to fall in love with someone who saw her life's work as nothing more than a passing amusement? The question burned in her chest, but she had no answer. By the time she returned home that night, exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders, not just from work, but from the emotional battle raging inside her. Enrique was already there, sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. Leticia hesitated at the doorway, watching him, wondering if he had even noticed her absence throughout the day. For a brief moment, she considered saying nothing, swallowing her pain like she always did. But something inside her cracked. "Do you really think my bakery is nothing more than a hobby?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended, but firm. Enrique barely looked up, sighing as if the conversation bored him before it even began. "Oh, come on, Leticia. Why are you making this into something bigger than it is?" His dismissive tone sent a sharp sting through her chest, but she refused to back down. "Because it is big to me," she shot back, stepping closer. "It's my family's legacy, my dream, and you—" Her voice wavered for just a second, but she steadied herself. "You make me feel like it's worthless." For the first time, Enrique set his phone down, rubbing his temples as if dealing with her emotions was an unbearable inconvenience. "Leticia, you're being dramatic. I never said it was worthless. I just meant that in the grand scheme of things, it's small." The word hung between them like an unspoken insult, slicing through her last ounce of patience. A silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Leticia searched his face for something, remorse, understanding, anything, but all she found was impatience. And in that moment, she knew. It wasn't that Enrique had changed. He had always been this way. She had simply been too in love to see it. The realization settled in her stomach like a stone, heavy and immovable. No matter how much she tried, no matter how much love she poured into their relationship, he would never see her the way she deserved to be seen. And for the first time since she met him, she wondered if holding on to this relationship was worth losing herself in the process. That night, Leticia barely slept. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing in endless circles, every memory with Enrique replayed in her mind. The laughter, the whispered promises, the moments she had mistaken for love. But now, those same memories carried a different weight, one she couldn't ignore. She had spent so much time justifying his words, excusing his behavior, convincing herself that things would get better. But deep down, she knew the truth. Love should never make someone feel small. And yet, that was exactly how Enrique made her feel, insignificant, unworthy, like her dreams were nothing more than childish fantasies. The realization cut deep, but with it came a new feeling she hadn't expected: clarity. The next morning she moved with newfound determination. As she tied her apron around her waist, she felt an unfamiliar sense of defiance stirring within her. She refused to let someone like Enrique dictate her worth. The bakery, her passion, the legacy she carried, it all meant something no matter how much he tried to diminish it. She greeted her customers with genuine warmth, allowing herself to soak in their appreciation, their loyalty. These people valued what she created. They saw her talent, her effort, her dedication, and for the first time in a long while, she started to see it too. Enrique's voice had been in her head for too long, whispering doubts, feeding insecurities. But today, she decided it was time to silence it. Still, the weight of her emotions wasn't so easily shaken off. As the day went on, she caught herself glancing at her phone, half expecting a message from Enrique, an apology, an acknowledgement, anything. But there was nothing. A part of her had hoped, despite everything, that he would realize how much he had hurt her, that he would at least try to make things right. But deep down, she knew that wasn't who he was. Enrique wasn't the type to admit fault. To him, she was just overreacting, being emotional, making a big deal out of nothing. The thought sent a surge of frustration through her, but it also brought with it an undeniable truth. She couldn't change him. She could only decide what she was willing to accept. By the time she locked up the bakery that evening, Letitia had made up her mind. She wasn't going to wait for Henrique to see her worth. She wasn't going to beg for his validation, his approval, his love. If he couldn't appreciate who she was and what she had built, then he didn't deserve a place in her life. The thought scared her. Letting go of something she had once believed was love, but it also filled her with something else, freedom, because for the first time in a long while, she wasn't trying to fit into someone else's expectations. She was choosing herself. And as she walked home, the weight on her chest felt just a little bit lighter. It was supposed to be a special night, an opportunity for Letitia to expand her business and prove her talent to people who could help her grow. When Henrique invited her to an exclusive dinner with influential investors, she saw it as a chance to talk about her bakery's future, maybe even gain new supporters who recognized the value of her artisanal recipes. She spent hours preparing, choosing an elegant yet simple dress, something that made her feel confident but still true to herself. As she looked in the mirror before leaving, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was the moment when Henrique would finally show that he believed in her, that he was proud to have her by his side. The moment they arrived at the high-end restaurant, however, something shifted. The room was filled with men in tailored suits and women adorned in designer jewelry, the air thick with expensive perfume and polished conversations. Henrique straightened his posture, adopting that calculated confidence he wore so well. But Letitia immediately sensed the change in his demeanor. Gone was the affectionate, charming man she had fallen for. Instead, he seemed distant, composed, as if he was already playing a role she didn't fit into. When he introduced her to the group, his words sent a cold chill down her spine. "This is my fiancée, Letitia. She owns a small bakery," he said, his tone almost dismissive. No mention of her success, no pride in her achievements, just a brief statement that reduced her passion to something insignificant. For the rest of the evening, Letitia felt like a shadow beside him. Whenever she tried to join the conversation, Henrique found subtle ways to push her aside. If she mentioned her bakery's growing popularity, he would laugh lightly and redirect the topic to his latest business deal. If someone showed interest in her work, he would interrupt before she could elaborate, making jokes about how she just loved baking too much to ever think about expansion. And when one investor, genuinely intrigued, asked if she had considered exporting her products, Letitia felt a flicker of excitement. "Actually, I've been researching ways to introduce our traditional recipes to international markets," she began, her voice filled with enthusiasm. But before she could finish, Henrique cut in. "She has big dreams," he said with a patronizing chuckle. "Sometimes she forgets how complicated the real business world is." His words, laced with condescension, stung deeper than any outright insult. Around the table, some guests exchanged awkward glances, while others offered small, sympathetic smiles. Letitia forced herself to swallow the lump forming in her throat, pretending not to care. But inside, something was breaking. She had spent so long convincing herself that Henrique's coldness was just a phase, that deep down he still supported her. But standing there, surrounded by strangers who saw her as nothing more than the woman who baked bread, she realized the painful truth. Henrique didn't respect her. And worse, he never had. Letitia spent the rest of the dinner trapped in silent humiliation, forcing a smile whenever necessary, but feeling utterly invisible. Every now and then, she glanced at Henrique, hoping for some kind of reassurance. A small gesture that showed he understood how much his words had hurt her, but there was nothing. He was in his element, laughing, exchanging business strategies, effortlessly navigating the high-class world he was so desperate to be part of. And Letitia, she was just there, an accessory, someone to be acknowledged when convenient but never truly valued. With each passing moment, she felt smaller, more out of place, as if she had been invited into a world that had no intention of making space for her. As the evening progressed, She barely spoke, allowing the conversations to flow around her like a current she had no power to fight against. But she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, how Henrique had made her feel like a foolish little girl with naive dreams. It wasn't just the words he had said, it was the way he had said them, with that knowing smirk, that dismissive tone, as if he had to tolerate her ambitions rather than support them. And the worst part, no one had defended her. No one at that table had stepped in to say that her work mattered, that her bakery was more than just a small business. They had all just gone along with it, reinforcing what Henrique wanted her to believe, that she would never truly belong in his world. By the time the dinner was over, Letitia felt completely drained. As they walked out of the restaurant, she hesitated for a moment, gathering the courage to speak. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Henrique barely glanced at her as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Do what?" he replied, feigning innocence. Letitia clenched her fists, trying to keep her emotions in check. "You belittled me. You acted like my bakery was nothing, like I was nothing," she said, the words laced with the hurt she could no longer suppress. Henrique sighed, clearly irritated. "You're being too sensitive, Letitia. It was a business dinner. You have to understand how these things work. I can't let people think I'm investing in some small-town bakery." His words sent a sharp pang through her chest, but this time there was no denial, no excuse she could make for him. The car ride home was silent, filled with an unbearable tension that neither of them acknowledged. Letitia stared out of the window, watching the city lights blur together, feeling like a stranger in her own life. She had spent so much time fighting for this relationship, convincing herself that Henrique truly loved her, that his dismissiveness was just a flaw she could learn to live with. But tonight had changed something. Tonight, she had seen the truth with painful clarity. Henrique didn't just look down on her dreams. He looked down on her, and no amount of love could fix that. That night, Letitia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment of the dinner like a cruel film on repeat. Every laugh at her expense, every dismissive glance, every condescending remark, each one cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She had spent years building her bakery, putting every ounce of her heart into it, creating something that carried the weight of her family's history. And yet, in a single evening, Henrique had reduced it to nothing more than a trivial pastime, something unworthy of real recognition. The realization settled in her chest like a heavy stone, pressing against her ribs, making it hard to breathe. She had always believed love should be about mutual respect, about lifting each other up. But Henrique didn't lift her. He held her down, making her doubt her own worth. The next morning, she moved through her routine in a haze, her hands shaping dough mechanically, while her mind remained lost in thought. The comforting rhythm of the bakery had always been her refuge, the smell of fresh bread and the soft chatter of customers filling the space with warmth. But today, she felt disconnected from it all, as if she were watching her own life from a distance. When her assistant Clara noticed her unusual silence, she hesitated before speaking. "Are you okay, Letitia?" The concern in her voice was genuine, and for a brief moment Letitia considered brushing it off, pretending that nothing was wrong. But she was so tired, tired of pretending, tired of making excuses for Henrique, tired of convincing herself that everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. Letitia set down the rolling pin and sighed, leaning against the counter. "Have you ever loved someone so much that you ignored the way they made you feel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara frowned, wiping her hands on her apron before stepping closer. "Love shouldn't make you feel invisible," she said simply, her words striking Letitia harder than she expected. She hadn't told Clara about the dinner, but somehow the younger woman had managed to say exactly what she needed to hear. "Love shouldn't make you feel invisible." The sentence echoed in Letitia's mind, reverberating through every moment she had spent trying to prove her worth to someone who refused to see it. She had been holding on to a version of Henrique that no longer existed, perhaps one that had never truly existed at all. As the day went on, Leticia kept thinking about all the moments she had dismissed, all the small ways Henrique had made her question herself. Every time he had downplayed her success, every time he had made her feel like her dreams were foolish, every time he had laughed at her passion instead of celebrating it. It wasn't just the dinner, it was a pattern, a slow erosion of her confidence, a manipulation so subtle she hadn't even noticed it happening, but now she saw it clearly. And for the first time, the idea of a life without Henrique didn't terrify her. It felt like something else entirely. It felt like freedom. That evening, when Leticia arrived home, the weight of the past few days pressed heavily on her chest. Henrique was already there, casually scrolling through his phone on the couch, completely unaware of the emotional storm raging inside her. She stood by the doorway for a moment, watching him, trying to understand how she had let things come to this. How had she allowed herself to shrink, to accept being treated as if her dreams were insignificant? She had spent so much time trying to fit into his world, trying to be the woman he wanted. But now, she wasn't sure she even recognized herself. The realization sent a cold shiver down her spine. She had changed. No, she had been changing for a long time, and not in the way she had hoped. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her voice firm but calm. "We need to talk." Henrique barely glanced up from his phone, his expression bored, as if he already knew what she was going to say, and had decided it wasn't important. "Now? Can't it wait until later?" he asked, his tone carrying the same indifference that had been suffocating her for months. But Leticia wasn't backing down this time. "No, it can't." She sat across from him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I can't keep pretending this relationship is working." The words tasted foreign on her tongue, but the moment they were spoken, she felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't filtering her emotions, wasn't tiptoeing around his feelings while ignoring her own. Henrique sighed, setting his phone down with an exaggerated motion, as if this conversation were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Leticia, you're overreacting again. Is this still about that stupid dinner?" His dismissiveness stung, but it didn't shake her resolve. "It's about everything," she said, her voice steady. "It's about how you look down on me, how you belittle what I do, how you make me feel like I'm never enough. I've spent so much time trying to prove myself to you, trying to make you proud, but I've realized something. I shouldn't have to beg for respect in my own relationship." Her heart pounded as she spoke, but she refused to let the fear take over. She had spent enough time being afraid of confrontation, of losing him, but now she understood. She had already lost something far more important, herself. For a brief moment, Henrique just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a bitter chuckle, he leaned back against the couch. "So, that's it? You're just going to throw everything away because of some imaginary slight?" His arrogance was infuriating, but it no longer had the power to shake her. Leticia felt an unexpected calm settle over her. "No," she said simply. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing myself for the first time in a long time." And with that, she stood up, feeling lighter than she had in months. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she knew one thing for certain. She was done settling for less than she deserved. Henrique scoffed, shaking his head, as if Leticia's words were nothing more than a childish tantrum. "You're being dramatic," he muttered, standing up and walking toward the kitchen as if the conversation didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered to her. Leticia watched him, waiting for something. An apology, a moment of realization, some sign that he understood how much he had hurt her. But he just opened the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and took a sip like nothing had happened. The casualness of it all was what hurt the most. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't trying to fight for their relationship, because to him, she was just another thing in his life, replaceable, unimportant, easily dismissed. A wave of disappointment crashed over her, but it was different this time. It wasn't the suffocating sadness she had felt for months, the kind that made her doubt herself. No, this was something else, clarity. She had spent so long trying to earn his respect, believing that if she just worked harder, loved more, compromised enough, he would finally see her. But he never would, not because she wasn't enough, but because he never truly valued her in the first place. And now, looking at him standing there, completely unbothered, she realized she no longer wanted to fight for his approval. She didn't need it. She never had. "I'm leaving," she said, and this time, her voice didn't waver. Enrique turned to her, finally giving her his full attention, but there was no desperation in his eyes, just mild disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend that she would actually go through with it. "Leaving?" he repeated, almost amused. "Where would you even go?" Letitia straightened her spine, feeling a strength she hadn't felt in a long time. "Anywhere but here," she replied, and she meant it. She didn't have every detail figured out yet, but she knew one thing. Staying with someone who made her feel small wasn't an option anymore. Enrique exhaled, running a hand through his hair, still not taking her seriously. "You're not thinking straight, Letitia. Just sleep on it, and we'll talk tomorrow." His voice carried the same patronizing tone he always used when dismissing her feelings, the same one that had kept her doubting herself for far too long. But this time, she wasn't falling for it. "No," she said firmly, "there is no tomorrow for us, Enrique. I deserve more than this." And with those final words, she turned and walked toward the door, feeling a sense of liberation with every step. For the first time in years, she was choosing herself. And that choice, she realized, was the most powerful one she had ever made. The first night away from Enrique felt strange, like stepping into an unfamiliar world where every sound was too loud, every silence too heavy. Letitia had packed a single suitcase and left without looking back. Yet as she sat in a small hotel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper, doubt started to creep in. Had she made the right choice? Was she really strong enough to walk away from everything she had known? But then she remembered the look on Enrique's face when she told him she was leaving. The utter lack of concern, the quiet arrogance, as if he was certain she would come crawling back. That thought alone was enough to steady her resolve. She had spent too long allowing him to dictate her worth. Now it was time to rebuild herself, one step at a time. The next morning she woke up early, her body still adjusting to the absence of Enrique's presence. But instead of lingering in the past, she forced herself out of bed and into action. The bakery was still hers. Her dreams were still alive. If anything, she had more reason than ever to prove, to herself, not to him, that she could succeed without his approval. Walking through the doors of her bakery that morning, she felt a surge of emotions. Fear, excitement, uncertainty, but above all, she felt free. The smell of fresh bread and cinnamon wrapped around her like an embrace, reminding her why she had fought so hard for this place. This was her home, this was her legacy, and she would not let anyone take that away from her. Clara was the first to notice the change. "You look different," she said, watching Letitia knead the dough with an intensity she hadn't seen in months. Letitia smiled, the first genuine one in a long time. "I left him," she admitted, the words feeling lighter now that they were spoken aloud. Clara's eyes widened, then softened with understanding. "Good," she said simply, before handing Letitia a tray of croissants to put in the oven. There was no pity in her voice, no unnecessary sympathy, just quiet support. And in that moment, Letitia realized how much she had needed it. She wasn't alone in this. She had people who believed in her, people who saw her for who she truly was. As the day went on, Letitia poured herself into her work, losing herself in the rhythm of baking. Each pastry, each loaf of bread felt like a small act of defiance, a reminder that she was more than Enrique's dismissive words. Customers came and went, filling the space with warmth and laughter, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Letitia felt truly present. She didn't need fancy investors or high society validation to prove her worth. The love and loyalty of her customers, the satisfaction of creating something with her own hands, that was enough. That had always been enough. And as she wiped flour from her hands and looked around the bakery, she knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The first few days on her own were a test of resilience, each moment filled with emotions that ranged from exhilarating freedom to deep, aching uncertainty. Letitia moved through her bakery with renewed determination, yet at night, when the world quieted down, doubt tried to creep in. She had spent so many years tying her life to Henrique's that it felt strange to exist outside of his shadow. But every morning, as she opened the shop and welcomed her customers, she reminded herself why she had left. This was her purpose, her passion, and no amount of self-doubt would take that away from her again. Letitia wasn't just running a bakery. She was reclaiming herself, piece by piece. It didn't take long for the news of her breakup to spread through town. Customers whispered, exchanging knowing glances as they ordered their pastries, some offering subtle words of encouragement, others pretending not to know. Letitia wasn't sure how she felt about the attention, but she appreciated the quiet support. The people who truly cared never asked invasive questions or treated her like a wounded woman. They simply kept coming, filling her bakery with life, proving that her success was never dependent on anyone but herself. And for the first time in years, she realized something profound. Her business had never needed Henrique. It had always thrived because of her own hard work, her own talent, and the genuine love she poured into every recipe. One afternoon, as she was stacking freshly baked loaves onto the display shelves, the bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to find someone she hadn't expected to see. Livia, her cousin, stood in the entrance, her sharp eyes scanning the bakery before settling on Letitia with a small, knowing smile. "I heard you finally came to your senses," Livia said, stepping inside and brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. Letitia let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "Took me long enough, didn't it?" she replied, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron. Livia had always been blunt, never one to sugarcoat the truth. But right now, Letitia appreciated that honesty more than ever. Livia leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "So, what's next?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. It was a simple question, but it carried so much weight. What was next? Letitia had spent so long trying to fit into Henrique's world that she had never stopped to think about what she truly wanted. But now, standing in her bakery, surrounded by the scents and sounds that made her feel whole, she finally had an answer. "I'm going to make this place bigger than ever," she said, a fire igniting in her chest. "Not for anyone else, just for me." And as she spoke, she felt something shift inside her. Something unbreakable, something unstoppable. She was done doubting herself. It was time to build the future she deserved. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Letitia felt herself growing stronger, more certain of the path she had chosen. The bakery was thriving, not just because of her dedication, but because she had finally allowed herself to embrace its full potential. She no longer hesitated when making decisions, no longer questioned whether she was capable of handling the business on her own. And the more she stepped into her role as the true owner of her destiny, the more she realized how much Henrique had held her back. Every time she looked at the bustling shop, at the satisfied customers who returned day after day, she saw proof that she had never needed his approval, only her own belief in herself. But with newfound success came unexpected challenges. Managing finances, negotiating with suppliers, planning future expansions. It was a different kind of pressure, one that tested her limits in ways she hadn't anticipated. There were nights when she barely slept, her mind racing with calculations and ideas. But unlike before, this exhaustion felt different. It wasn't draining, it was invigorating. Because this time, every effort she put in was for herself, not for someone else's validation. And as she reviewed new partnership opportunities, carefully considering the best path forward, she realized something else. She was no longer afraid of failure. The fear that Henrique had planted in her, the doubt he had nurtured with every condescending remark, was gone. She had proven first to herself and then to everyone else that she was more than capable of succeeding on her own. One evening, as she closed up the bakery, Clara approached her hesitantly, a look of uncertainty in her eyes. "Letitia, can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, twisting a towel nervously between her fingers. Letitia nodded, sensing the seriousness in her voice. "Of course. What's wrong?" Clara hesitated for a moment before sighing. "I overheard something today. Apparently, Henrique has been telling people that you're struggling without him, that the bakery is barely staying afloat." The words hit Letitia like a cold wind, but instead of anger, all she felt was disappointment. Of course he would do this. Of course he couldn't stand the idea of her succeeding without him. Letitia let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "Let him talk," she said, her voice calm but firm. "People who matter will see the truth for themselves." And that was the difference now. Before, she would have been devastated by his words, desperate to prove him wrong. But today, she didn't need to. The bakery spoke for itself, her success was evident, and she no longer had anything to prove to Henrique or anyone else. He could try to rewrite the story, try to twist the truth to protect his own pride, but it wouldn't change reality. Letitia had won, not in a way that needed public recognition, but in the most important way possible. She had taken back her power, and she wasn't giving it up for anything. Despite Henrique's attempts to undermine her, Letitia refused to let his words shake her. She knew who she was now, and no rumor or bitter comment could erase the truth of what she had built. Instead of dwelling on his pettiness, she doubled down on her efforts, pouring herself even deeper into the bakery. She started testing new recipes, introducing seasonal specialties, and connecting with local businesses to collaborate on community events. Customers noticed the shift. There was something different about Letitia now, a confidence that radiated from her every movement. The bakery wasn't just surviving without Henrique, it was thriving in ways she had never imagined before. Her newfound determination also pushed her to reconsider something she had long feared, expanding beyond the small shop she had always known. The idea had been there for years, lingering in the back of her mind, but Henrique had convinced her that it was unrealistic, that she wasn't capable of handling something bigger. Now, she saw through his words for what they were, an attempt to keep her small so she would always need him, and she refused to let his voice linger in her mind any longer. One evening, after going over the numbers with Livia, she realized something incredible. She wasn't just ready to expand, she was in a position to do it without taking unnecessary risks. The bakery's success had put her in control, and this time no one would make her doubt herself. Still, the process wasn't easy. There were countless decisions to make, from choosing the right location to hiring additional staff, and every choice felt like another test of her abilities. But unlike before, when she would have hesitated and second-guessed herself, she now approached each challenge with confidence. She met with real estate agents, negotiated contracts, and even consulted with other small business owners for advice. Every step of the way, she reminded herself that this was hers, that she was in charge of her future, and no one else could take that away from her. And with each passing day, the fear of stepping into the unknown lessened, replaced by an unshakable belief in herself and the vision she had for the bakery. Then, on a quiet evening, as she prepared to close for the night, she saw someone standing outside the shop. For a moment her heart clenched, recognizing the familiar figure before she even saw his face fully. Henrique. He lingered near the entrance, his expression unreadable, as if debating whether or not to come inside. Letitia stood frozen for just a second, old emotions threatening to rise to the surface, but then she exhaled, steadying herself. She wasn't the same woman he had tried to control. She wasn't waiting for his approval anymore. So instead of hesitating, she walked to the door, unlocked it, and met his gaze head-on. "What do you want, Henrique?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. And as she watched him shift uncomfortably under her steady gaze, she knew, whatever he had come to say, it no longer had the power to break her. Enrique hesitated for a moment, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as if searching for the right words. Letitia watched him closely, but this time there was no nervousness in her stance, no desperate need to decipher his intentions. She wasn't the woman who once craved his validation. She was standing on her own now, and she refused to let him shake that foundation. "I just wanted to talk," he finally said, his voice carrying a careful neutrality, as if testing the waters. Letitia crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "About what?" she asked, unwilling to make this easy for him. If he had come looking for forgiveness or another chance to manipulate her, he would leave disappointed. Enrique let out a small sigh, rubbing the back of his neck before speaking. "I've been hearing things," he admitted. "People say the bakery is doing better than ever, that you're planning to expand." There was something unreadable in his expression, a flicker of something close to regret. But Letitia didn't let it affect her. She simply nodded. "That's right," she said. "I'm growing, just like I always wanted to." The way she said it, calm, steady, unapologetic, seemed to unsettle him. He had expected hesitation, maybe even a trace of the woman who once bent over backward to accommodate him. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone who no longer needed his approval to believe in herself. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken history. Enrique finally exhaled and glanced away. "I guess I underestimated you," he murmured, his voice quieter now. Letitia felt a strange mix of emotions at his words, not pride, not relief, but something closer to indifference. She didn't need his recognition. She didn't need him to see her worth. The only validation that mattered was her own. "Yes," she said simply. "You did." The words carried no malice, only truth. And for the first time, Enrique had nothing to say in return. He had spent so long believing she needed him, convinced that without his guidance, she would fail. But now, standing before the woman she had become, he finally saw what had been true all along. She was always capable, always strong. He had just been too blind to see it. Enrique shifted once more, as if contemplating whether to say something else, but then he simply nodded. "Good luck, Letitia," he said, before turning to leave. Letitia watched as he walked away, disappearing into the dimly lit streets. But there was no sadness in her heart, no lingering ache for what once was. She had already mourned the relationship, already faced the pain of losing him. Now she was free. Closing the door behind her, she turned off the lights and looked around her bakery, her sanctuary, her legacy. She had done this on her own. She had fought for herself. And as she stood in the quiet, surrounded by the scent of freshly baked bread, she knew with absolute certainty her future had never been brighter. The morning after Enrique's unexpected visit, Letitia woke up feeling lighter than she had in years. There was no lingering sadness, no second guessing, just a sense of finality that filled her with quiet satisfaction. She had spent too much time believing she needed closure from him. But last night had proven otherwise. Watching him walk away, knowing that his opinion no longer held any weight in her life, was all the closure she would ever need. Now her focus was entirely on the future, the expansion of her bakery, the dreams she had put on hold for far too long. And for the first time in years, she felt completely in control of her own story. As she stepped into the bakery, the familiar scent of warm bread and vanilla wrapped around her like an embrace, grounding her in the present. Clara greeted her with a knowing smile, handing her a fresh cup of coffee. "You look different," she observed, leaning against the counter. Letitia chuckled softly, taking a sip of the rich, bitter brew. "Because I finally let go," she admitted. The words felt good on her tongue, like a truth she had been waiting to say out loud. Clara nodded approvingly. "Good, you've been carrying that weight for too long." Letitia smiled, appreciating how effortlessly Clara understood her without needing further explanation. This was where she belonged, with people who truly saw her, who believed in her. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Business had been booming ever since Letitia began preparing for expansion, and today was no exception. Orders flooded in, customers filled every available table, and the sound of laughter and clinking coffee cups created a comforting rhythm. As she moved between the kitchen and the storefront, overseeing operations, she felt a deep sense of pride. This bakery wasn't just a business, it was a reflection of her resilience, a testament to everything she had overcome. And now she was ready to take it to the next level. The thought sent a thrill through her, a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. Later that evening, after the last customer had left and the staff had begun cleaning up, Letitia sat down with Livia to go over the final details of the expansion plan. The numbers looked promising, and after weeks of careful negotiations, she was ready to sign the lease for a second location. "Are you sure about this?" Livia asked, scanning the contract one last time. Letitia met her cousin's gaze, and for the first time in a long time answered without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything," and she meant it. This wasn't just about growing a business. It was about reclaiming everything she had lost. Her confidence, her independence, her belief in herself. She was no longer afraid of failure. She was ready to take the next step, no matter what it took. Signing the lease felt like crossing an invisible threshold, a symbolic moment that marked the beginning of a new era for Letitia. As she pressed the pen to the paper, she felt a rush of emotions, excitement, pride, and even a hint of nervousness. But fear no longer held her captive. She had faced far greater challenges than this, and she had emerged stronger. When she handed the signed documents back to Livia, her cousin grinned. "Well, there's no turning back now," Livia teased, tapping the stack of papers against the table. Letitia let out a soft laugh, feeling a weight lift from her chest. "Good," she said simply. "I don't want to turn back. I want to move forward." And she meant every word. The following days were a blur of preparations. Between coordinating renovations for the new location and keeping up with the increasing demand at her original bakery, Letitia barely had time to catch her breath. Yet, despite the chaos, she thrived in it. This was the kind of pressure she welcomed, the kind that came from building something meaningful, from seeing her vision come to life. She worked tirelessly, making sure every detail was just right, from the layout of the new shop to the suppliers she would be partnering with. There was no room for shortcuts. This wasn't just about expanding her business. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of achieving everything she had once been told was impossible. But no journey worth taking comes without obstacles. One afternoon, while reviewing finances, Letitia noticed discrepancies in some of the past transactions linked to the original bakery. Frowning, she called Livia over, and together they went through the records carefully. "This doesn't add up," Livia murmured, her brows furrowing as she double-checked the statements. A sinking feeling settled in Letitia's stomach as the reality dawned on her. Henrique. During their time together, he had insisted on handling parts of the business's finances, claiming he had more experience in those matters. Now it was clear that he hadn't just undermined her personally. He had left a financial mess behind as well. For a brief moment, anger bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to consume her, but she refused to let it. Henrique had already stolen too much of her peace. She wasn't going to let his actions define her future. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders. "We'll fix it," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever damage he caused, we'll find a way to repair it." Livia nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "And we'll make sure he never has the chance to do this again." Letitia agreed. This was just another challenge, another hurdle to overcome. She had come too far to let anything or anyone derail her now. The more Letitia and Livia dug into the financial records, the clearer Henrique's deception became. There were payments made to companies she had never heard of, withdrawals labeled as business expenses that didn't align with anything bakery-related, and small but consistent sums missing from accounts over several months. It was a carefully orchestrated mess, designed to go unnoticed for as long as possible. Letitia clenched her fists, feeling a fresh wave of anger course through her. He hadn't just belittled her dreams, he had stolen from them. And worst of all, he had done it while convincing her that he was helping. The betrayal stung, but she refused to let it break her. She had rebuilt herself once before, and she would do it again. Sitting at the bakery's back office, Livia tapped a pen against the table, deep in thought. "We need to report this," she said finally. "He can't get away with this, Letitia. He could have destroyed your business." Letitia nodded slowly, the weight of the decision pressing on her. Taking legal action meant revisiting wounds she wanted to leave behind, but she knew Livia was right. If she stayed silent, Enrique would do this to someone else. And more than that, she refused to let him walk away without consequences. "Let's do it," she said, her voice firm. "But first, I want to make sure the bakery is stable. I won't let this situation derail everything I've worked for." She would handle this the same way she had handled every other challenge, on her own terms, with strength and resilience. In the days that followed, Letitia worked tirelessly to fill the financial gaps Enrique had left behind. She renegotiated supplier contracts, optimized expenses, and carefully adjusted the budget for the expansion without compromising quality. It was exhausting work, but with every step forward, she felt herself regaining control. The bakery wasn't just surviving, it was adapting, evolving, and preparing for an even brighter future. Customers kept coming, showing their support in small but meaningful ways. Some left extra tips, others spread the word about her upcoming expansion, and a few regulars even brought her homemade meals, insisting she needed to take care of herself too. Their kindness reminded her that she wasn't alone, that what she had built mattered to more people than she had ever realized. One evening, after closing up shop, Letitia stood in the empty bakery, taking in the space that had once been her entire world. She had spent years believing she needed Enrique's guidance, his approval, his presence to succeed. But now, standing here, she saw the truth. Everything she had accomplished had been because of her own hard work. He had never been the reason for her success. If anything, he had been the obstacle she had needed to overcome, and she had completely. As she turned off the lights and locked the doors, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle over her. The past no longer held power over her. The only direction left to go was forward. The next morning, Letitia woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. If Enrique thought his betrayal would ruin her, he had underestimated just how resilient she had become. She spent the early hours finalizing her strategy, ensuring that every financial loophole he had created was closed, every missing cent accounted for, and every dishonest transaction traced back to him. Livia had already contacted a lawyer, and together they compiled all the necessary documents to take legal action. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. Letitia wasn't the same woman who had once ignored the warning signs, who had let herself shrink under Enrique's shadow. She was standing tall now, and she refused to let him get away with what he had done. Still, confronting the legal process was draining. There were meetings, calls, and endless paperwork that forced her to relive moments she wanted to forget. But unlike before, she wasn't alone. Livia stood beside her through every step, her unwavering support a constant source of strength. Clara and the bakery staff took over more responsibilities, ensuring that business never faltered even when Letitia was away handling legal matters. And her customers, her loyal, incredible customers, kept coming, filling the bakery with warmth and encouragement. Some had heard the rumors about Enrique's deceit, and while they never pried, they made their support clear in their own ways. Through kind words, handwritten notes, and a steady stream of orders that never seemed to slow. One afternoon, as she was finishing up a meeting with her lawyer, she received a call she wasn't expecting. "We've reviewed your case, and given the evidence you've provided, there's a strong chance Enrique will face legal consequences," the lawyer informed her. Letitia exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of those words. It wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was real. Enrique had always walked through life believing he was untouchable, that his charm and connections would protect him from accountability. But not this time. This time, he would have to answer for what he had done. And the best part, Letitia wasn't afraid of him anymore. That evening, as she walked through her bakery, she took a moment to appreciate how far she had come. Every challenge, every heartbreak, every obstacle had brought her to this moment. Not broken, but stronger. She was no longer defined by the love she had lost, the trust that had been betrayed. She was defined by her resilience, her ability to rebuild even after everything had been taken from her. And as she stood there, surrounded by the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, she knew with absolute certainty she was ready for whatever came next. A few days later, as Leticia was organizing inventory in the back of the bakery, her phone buzzed with a message from Livia. "It's done. Enrique has officially been served." Leticia stared at the screen for a moment, her heart beating steadily, not with fear, not with doubt, but with certainty. She had worried that this moment would bring a flood of emotions, that facing the legal battle ahead would reopen wounds she had worked so hard to heal. But instead, she felt a sense of justice settling over her like a protective shield. Enrique had spent years chipping away at her confidence, stealing from her business and making her believe she wasn't capable of standing on her own. Now, he would finally have to answer for it. And she was already beyond his reach. Later that evening, as the bakery was closing, Clara approached Leticia with a hopeful glint in her eyes. "So, does this mean we can finally start celebrating?" she asked, a grin tugging at her lips. Leticia laughed, the tension of the past few weeks finally giving way to something lighter. "I think we deserve it," she admitted. Clara clapped her hands together. "Good, because I already told everyone that we're having a small gathering tomorrow night to toast to the expansion." Leticia shook her head, amused but touched by the gesture. The people in her life, Livia, Clara, the bakery staff, even her loyal customers, had stood by her through everything. This victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had believed in her when she had doubted herself. The next evening, the bakery was filled with laughter, the scent of cinnamon and fresh pastries mixing with the warm glow of the overhead lights. The small celebration wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect. Surrounded by the people who had helped her rebuild, who had reminded her that she was never truly alone. Livia raised a glass of sparkling cider, her voice strong and full of pride. "To Leticia," she said, "for proving that resilience, talent, and a little bit of stubbornness can turn any setback into success." Everyone cheered, and Leticia felt a swell of gratitude wash over her. She had fought for this moment. She had earned it. And now she was ready for everything that lay ahead. As the evening wound down, Leticia stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was quiet, the stars scattered across the sky like tiny beacons of hope. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool breeze brush against her skin. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, but none of that scared her anymore. Because she knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that no matter what happened, she would always find a way forward. She was no longer defined by her past. She was defined by her strength. And with that thought, she stepped back inside, ready to embrace the next chapter of her life. The morning after the celebration, Leticia woke up feeling something she hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. No anxiety gnawed at her chest. No lingering doubts whispered in her mind. Instead, there was a quiet confidence, a certainty that she had earned every bit of success coming her way. She got ready as usual, tying her apron around her waist with a firm knot. But something about the way she moved felt different. This was no longer just a daily routine. It was a statement, a promise to herself that she would never let anyone make her feel small again. Today was the first day of a new chapter, one where she stood fully in her power. At the bakery, the atmosphere still carried the warmth of the previous night's gathering. Clara was humming softly as she arranged the fresh pastries in the display case, and the scent of cinnamon and butter filled the air. "You seem lighter today," Clara observed with a knowing smile as Letitia set a tray of warm croissants on the counter. Letitia chuckled, shaking her head. "I think I finally let go of everything weighing me down." And it was true. The bitterness, the anger, even the hurt, none of it controlled her anymore. She had confronted her past, fought for her future, and now she was exactly where she was meant to be. By midday, the bakery was bustling with customers, many of whom had been coming for years. Some had witnessed her journey firsthand, from the days when she was just starting out to the struggles she had faced with Henrique. But today, there were no murmurs of concern, no pitying glances, only genuine excitement for what was ahead. An elderly woman, a longtime patron, approached the counter with a warm smile. "I heard you're expanding, dear. Your grandmother would be so proud," she said, her eyes shining with kindness. Letitia felt a lump rise in her throat but pushed through it, offering a grateful smile. "Thank you. I hope to make her proud every day." Or, as the day wound down, Letitia found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had once believed that love required sacrifice, that in order to be accepted, she had to make herself smaller. But she had been wrong. Love, real love, should never require someone to diminish themselves, and she had learned that the hard way. Standing in the middle of her bakery, surrounded by the life she had built with her own hands, she finally understood the lesson her struggles had been trying to teach her all along. She had never needed Henrique. She had never needed anyone to validate her worth. She had been enough all along. That evening, after closing the bakery, Letitia sat at one of the wooden tables, running her fingers absently over the grain of the surface. This place had been her sanctuary, her battlefield, and now her greatest triumph. Every challenge, every moment of doubt had led her to this point. But she knew her journey wasn't over. Expansion wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a reality she had to manage carefully. The new location was set to open in a few months, and with that came more responsibilities, more decisions, and more risks. Yet, unlike before, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. Livia arrived a few minutes later, dropping a folder onto the table with a satisfied smirk. "I've gone through everything again. The finances are solid, the suppliers are reliable, and the legal situation with Henrique is officially out of your hands. You've won, Letitia." The words settled over her like a warm blanket. She had spent so much time fighting battles, constantly looking over her shoulder, expecting another problem to arise. But now, for the first time, there were no more hidden threats, no more doubts looming over her. "It doesn't even feel real," Letitia admitted, exhaling slowly. "I spent so long waiting for the next disaster that I forgot what it's like to just move forward." Livia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Well, it's time you start getting used to it. This is your future now." The following morning, Letitia made her way to the new bakery location, standing in the middle of the empty space that would soon be filled with life. The walls were bare, the floors unfinished, but she could already see it. Customers laughing over coffee, the scent of pastries filling every corner, the hum of a place built with love and resilience. She ran her hands along the countertop, imagining the countless memories that would be made here. This was hers. Not Enrique's, not anyone else's, just hers. And that thought alone filled her with a kind of joy she had never known before. Later that day, back at the original bakery, Clara handed Letitia an envelope with a curious expression. "This came for you," she said, watching Letitia carefully. Letitia opened it, her breath catching slightly as she read the familiar handwriting. It was from Henrique. "I see now that I was wrong about you. I didn't think you could do this without me, but you did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do regret the way I treated you." Letitia read the words twice, waiting for some old emotion to surface. Anger, sadness, resentment. But there was nothing. Just emptiness. He was just another piece of her past now. a chapter already written and closed. Without hesitation, she folded the letter, tossed it into the trash, and turned back to her work. Her future was waiting, and she had no intention of wasting another second looking back. The days leading up to the grand opening of the new bakery were filled with a whirlwind of preparations. Letitia barely had time to process everything that was happening, but she welcomed the chaos. Every moment spent selecting the final touches, the warm lighting, the rustic shelves, the elegant yet cozy decor, felt like a step closer to solidifying her dream. This wasn't just a second location, it was proof of her resilience, a testament to everything she had fought for. She had built this from the ground up, and every challenge she had faced only made this moment more meaningful. The excitement in the air was palpable, and for the first time in a long time, Letitia felt a deep sense of fulfillment. One afternoon, as she was reviewing the final inventory orders, Clara sat across from her with a playful smirk. "You know, the buzz around town is crazy. Everyone's talking about the opening," she said, tapping her pen against the counter. "I even heard a reporter from the regional business magazine is interested in covering your story." Letitia raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Really?" she asked, unsure of how to feel about that level of attention. "Yeah," Clara continued. "People love a story of resilience, and let's be honest, yours is one of the best I've ever seen." Letitia chuckled, shaking her head. "I don't know if I'd call it that, but I guess I finally feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." The words felt true the moment they left her lips. Despite her confidence, the night before the grand opening, nerves crept in. As she stood in the middle of the new bakery, surrounded by the quiet anticipation of an empty space waiting to be filled, she felt a flicker of doubt. What if this didn't work? What if she failed? But then, she reminded herself, she had faced worse, survived more, and come out stronger every single time. Failure wasn't something to fear, it was something to learn from. And no matter what happened, she had already won. She had proven to herself that she was capable, that she was enough, and that she didn't need anyone else's validation to succeed. That thought alone was enough to steady her. The following morning, the new bakery's doors opened to a crowd larger than she had ever expected. Familiar faces from the town, loyal customers from her first shop, new visitors who had heard about her journey. Each one walked in, filling the space with warmth and laughter. Letitia stood behind the counter, watching the scene unfold, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was her moment, her new beginning, and she was ready for it. As she handed the first customer a warm loaf of bread, she smiled, knowing deep in her heart that this was only the start of something even greater. As the day went on, the bakery remained packed with customers, each one eager to support Letitia's new chapter. The warm scent of fresh bread and pastries filled the space, blending with the low hum of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter. Letitia moved through the shop with ease, greeting customers, overseeing the staff and making sure every detail was running smoothly. But more than that, she took a moment to truly take it all in. This was the life she had built, the result of late nights, early mornings, and an unwavering belief in herself. She had created something real, something lasting, and standing here now, she knew she would never let anyone make her feel small again. Midway through the afternoon, Livia pulled her aside with an amused smile. "You know, I think this is the first time I've seen you actually stop and enjoy yourself," she teased. Letitia laughed, shaking her head. "I guess I'm just realizing that I don't have to be in survival mode all the time," she admitted. "For so long, I was fighting to prove something, to Henrique, to myself, to everyone. But now, I don't feel like I have to prove anything anymore." Livia squeezed her shoulder. "That's because you don't. You won, Letitia, not just with the bakery, but with yourself." The words settled deep in her chest, warming her in a way she hadn't expected. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Letitia spotted a familiar face near the entrance. One of her oldest customers, Donna Rosa, a woman who had been coming to her first bakery since the very beginning. The elderly woman approached with slow, careful steps, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it, Minhafila," she said, taking Letitia's hands in hers. "Your grandmother would be so proud." Letitia swallowed the sudden lump in her throat, nodding as a wave of emotion threatened to overwhelm her. "I hope so," she whispered. "I just wanted to make something that would last, something that would honor what she taught me." Donna Rosa squeezed her hands. "And you did. You built more than a bakery, Letitia. You built a legacy." By the time the evening came, the last customer had left, and the bakery was finally quiet. Letitia stood at the center of it all, surrounded by the remnants of a successful opening, empty trays, flour-dusted countertops, and the lingering warmth of a day filled with joy. She let out a slow breath, her heart full. This wasn't just a business. It was her story, her strength, her victory. And as she turned off the lights and locked the doors, she knew one thing for certain. She had never been more ready for the future. That night, Letitia walked home under a sky full of stars, the cool breeze brushing against her skin as if the universe itself was congratulating her. Every step felt lighter, freer, as if the weight of the past had finally lifted. She thought about everything it had taken to get here, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the nights spent doubting herself. But standing at this point in her journey, she wouldn't change a thing. Every hardship had shaped her into the woman she was now, a woman who no longer sought approval, who no longer needed validation to know her worth. She had built something incredible, something that no one, not even Henrique, could take away from her. When she arrived home, she paused at the doorway, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The house, once filled with memories of a love that had turned toxic, now felt like her own again. She had redecorated, changed the furniture, brought in small touches that reflected who she truly was. There were no more shadows of the past lingering in the corners, no ghosts whispering doubts in the back of her mind. It was just her, standing in a space that felt new, refreshed, like a blank slate waiting to be filled with better, brighter memories. She had reclaimed her life, and that realization settled in her chest like a steady heartbeat, strong and unshakable. The next morning, she woke up to the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the curtains, a symbol of yet another new beginning. Instead of rushing out of bed, overwhelmed by responsibilities, she took a moment to appreciate the quiet. She had spent so long running, chasing success, battling her fears, proving her strength, but today, she didn't need to prove anything. She had already won. Stretching her arms above her head, she allowed herself to fully embrace this new reality. The bakery was thriving, her expansion was set in motion, and for the first time in years, she was truly happy. As she made her way to the bakery that morning, she knew this was only the start. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but she was ready for them. She had faced worse and come out stronger. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that real success wasn't just about business growth or financial gains. It was about believing in herself, standing firm in her worth, and never again allowing anyone to dim her light. And with that thought, she unlocked the bakery doors, took in the scent of warm bread and coffee, and stepped inside, knowing that the best chapters of her story were still yet to come. Letitia had always believed that endings carried a sense of finality, a closing of a door that left no room for anything else. But as she settled into this new phase of her life, she realized that some endings were merely transitions, paving the way for new beginnings. The bakery's expansion had been a success beyond what she had imagined, and every morning when she unlocked the doors, she was greeted by the familiar hum of a place filled with warmth, laughter, and the comforting scent of fresh bread. It was everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, and yet for the first time in a long while, she found herself wondering, what came next? One afternoon, as she sat in her office reviewing a proposal for a potential third location, Livia knocked on the door and entered without waiting for permission. "You've been staring at that paper for a while," she observed, dropping a cup of coffee onto Letitia's desk. "What's going on?" Letitia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I should be excited," she admitted. "This is everything I wanted, but for some reason I feel like there's something more. Something I haven't figured out yet." Livia studied her for a moment before sitting down across from her. "Maybe that's because you've spent so much time proving yourself that now, when there's nothing left to prove, you don't know what to do with that freedom." The words struck a chord deep within Letitia. She had spent years fighting against Enrique, against self-doubt, against the idea that she wasn't enough. But now she had won. She had built something extraordinary, a legacy that honored her family's past while creating a future entirely her own. And yet, Livia was right. For so long, her motivation had been fueled by the need to prove herself. Now she needed to find a new reason to push forward, something that wasn't rooted in past wounds but in the limitless possibilities of the future. "So what do I do?" Letitia asked, her voice quieter now. Livia smiled knowingly. "You stop worrying about what you should do and start asking yourself what you want to do." That night, Letitia sat in the quiet of her home, staring at a notebook filled with business plans, expansion strategies, and financial projections. They were all important, but for the first time she closed the book and set it aside. Instead, she let herself dream, without limitations, without expectations. Maybe the answer wasn't just in growing the business. Maybe it was in giving back, in helping others the way she had once wished someone would help her. The thought sent a thrill of excitement through her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. And as she closed her eyes, she knew that tomorrow she would wake up with a new purpose, one entirely her own. The next morning, Letitia stepped into the bakery with a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about selling pastries or expanding her business anymore. She wanted to create something bigger than herself, something that could make a real impact. As she worked through the morning rush, she couldn't shake the idea forming in the back of her mind. What if her bakery could be more than just a business? What if it could become a place of opportunity, a space where others could learn and grow, just as she had? The thought excited her, igniting a passion she hadn't felt in a long time. Later that afternoon, as she sat with Livia and Clara during a break, she finally voiced her idea. "I've been thinking," she began, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "What if we turned part of the bakery into a training space? A program for young people who want to learn baking, business, maybe even entrepreneurship." Livia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Like an apprenticeship program?" Letitia nodded. "Exactly. There are so many talented people out there who just need a chance, a place to start. I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to have dreams but not enough resources to make them happen. I want to change that." Clara leaned forward, her eyes lighting up. "That's actually an incredible idea. You're not just expanding the business, you're creating a legacy that helps others." The words settled deep in Letitia's heart, solidifying the direction she wanted to take. For so long, she had focused on proving herself, on making sure she was seen and valued. But now, she realized that true success wasn't just about personal achievement, it was about lifting others up along the way. This was her chance to give back, to turn everything she had learned into something meaningful. By the end of the day, Letitia was already outlining the first steps of the project. She would need partnerships, funding, and a structured plan. But none of that scared her. She had built a thriving business from the ground up, had faced betrayal and doubt, and had come out stronger. This was just another challenge, and she was ready for it. As she looked around her bakery, filled with people who had stood by her side, she knew that this was only the beginning of something even greater. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just thinking about proving herself, she was thinking about changing lives. The more Letitia thought about her new project, the more excited she became. That night, instead of going straight to bed, she sat at her kitchen table with a notebook, outlining ideas, listing potential partnerships, and sketching what the space inside the bakery could look like. She envisioned a place where young, aspiring bakers could learn not just the craft, but also the business side of running a shop, how to manage finances, source ingredients, and build a brand. It would be a chance to mentor those who, like her, had dreams but no clear path to follow. The idea filled her with energy, a deep and genuine enthusiasm she hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, she shared her plan with Livia in more detail, walking her through everything she had mapped out. Livia listened carefully, nodding along as she flipped through the pages of Letitia's notes. When Letitia finally paused, waiting for a reaction, Livia smiled. "This is ambitious," she admitted, "but if anyone can make it happen, it's you." Letitia felt a surge of confidence at her cousin's words. She had been afraid that people might think she was reaching too far, that she was getting ahead of herself. But hearing Livia's support reminded her that every big idea starts as a small one, just like her bakery had. The first step was securing funding. While the bakery was doing well financially, Letitia knew she would need additional resources to properly set up the program. That afternoon, she reached out to local business owners, explaining her vision and asking if they would be interested in supporting or sponsoring the initiative. Some responded with polite declines, but others showed real interest. One restaurant owner even offered to host a fundraising event, excited by the possibility of nurturing local talent. Letitia left each conversation feeling more determined than ever. This wasn't just a passing idea. It was becoming real, and she wouldn't stop until it came to life. As the day wound down, Letitia sat behind the counter, watching the last few customers finish their coffee and pastries. She thought about how different her life was now from where she had been just a year ago. She had gone from questioning her own worth to building something that would help others find theirs. This wasn't just a business expansion, it was a transformation, a way to leave something meaningful behind. And as she locked up the bakery that night, she knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found her purpose. Over the next few weeks, Letitia poured herself into turning her vision into reality. Every spare moment was spent drafting proposals, meeting with local organizations, and reaching out to suppliers who might be willing to donate ingredients for the training program. It was exhausting work, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came with purpose, with knowing that each step brought her closer to something meaningful. There were setbacks, of course. Some businesses weren't interested, some funding options fell through. But Letitia had learned to be relentless. She had fought for herself before, and now she was fighting for something even bigger. One afternoon, as she sat with Livia going through applications for the first round of apprentices, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride. There were young people from all walks of life. Some fresh out of school, others looking for a second chance after struggling to find stability. Many of them reminded Letitia of herself when she first started, full of passion but unsure of where to go. "Look at this," Livia said, holding up an application. "This girl learned to bake from her grandmother just like you." Letitia smiled, feeling a deep connection to these stories. This wasn't just about teaching baking. It was about giving others the chance to build something for themselves, just as she had. As the project gained traction, word began to spread beyond the bakery. A local newspaper reached out, wanting to do a feature on Letitia's journey, from struggling to be seen in her own relationship to becoming a self-made entrepreneur, helping others find their paths. When the article was published, customers flooded in with even more enthusiasm, some even offering to volunteer their time or resources to support the initiative. Letitia was humbled by the response. For so long, she had felt isolated in her struggles, but now she saw that she had built a community around her, one that truly believed in her vision. One evening, as she closed up shop, Clara walked over with a thoughtful expression. "You know, she said, leaning against the counter. "I think you've done more than just open a bakery. You've created something that really matters." Letitia exhaled slowly, letting the weight of those words settle over her. "I hope so," she admitted. "I just want to make a difference," Clara smiled. "You already have." And as Letitia locked the doors for the night, she realized that this, right here, was what success truly felt like. Not money, not recognition, but knowing she had built something that would outlast her, something that would continue to change lives long after the bakery's ovens had cooled. The night before the official launch of the apprenticeship program, Letitia found herself alone in the bakery, surrounded by the quiet hum of the refrigerators and the lingering scent of fresh dough. The space felt different tonight, charged with possibility, filled with the echoes of all the hard work it had taken to get here. She traced her fingers along the countertop, remembering the countless mornings she had stood in this very spot, doubting herself, wondering if she would ever be enough. Now there was no doubt. She had built something that mattered, something that would give others the opportunity she had once fought so hard for, and that, she realized, was the most fulfilling feeling she had ever known. The next morning, the bakery buzzed with excitement. The apprentices arrived one by one, nervous but eager, their eyes wide with anticipation as they stepped into the kitchen that would become their classroom. Letitia welcomed them personally, making sure they felt at home, just as she had when she first fell in love with baking. "This isn't just about making pastries," she told them as they gathered around the large wooden work table. "It's about learning to create something with your own hands, to take pride in what you build. It's about resilience." She saw her own journey reflected in their expressions, the uncertainty, the hope, the hunger for something more. And in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. Livia stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold with a proud smile. "I think this might be your greatest achievement yet," she whispered when Letitia joined her. Letitia exhaled, her chest swelling with a deep sense of fulfillment. "It's not just mine," she said. "It belongs to everyone who helped me get here." She glanced at Clara, who was teaching one of the apprentices how to properly knead dough, at the customers who had supported her even in her darkest moments, at the staff who had become her second family. This wasn't just about her success anymore. It was about lifting others up, about making sure no one else had to feel as lost as she once had. As the first batch of croissants came out of the oven, golden and flaky, the room filled with applause. The apprentices beamed with pride, their hands still dusted with flour, their faces glowing with accomplishment. Letitia clapped along with them, feeling an overwhelming sense of joy. This was only the beginning, but it was already more than she had ever dreamed of. And as she looked around at the life she had built, she realized something. She had spent years searching for happiness, for meaning, for purpose. But in the end, she hadn't just found it. She had created it. The weeks following the launch of the apprenticeship program were a whirlwind of activity. Letitia found herself juggling more responsibilities than ever, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt invigorated. Every morning, she arrived at the bakery before sunrise, preparing the kitchen for the apprentices, making sure everything was in place before the doors opened to the public. The energy in the shop had shifted. It was no longer just a business. It was a place of learning, of growth, of second chances. Watching the apprentices immerse themselves in the craft, seeing their confidence build with every loaf of bread and every perfectly layered pastry, filled her with a pride she had never known before. One afternoon, as Letitia observed one of the apprentices carefully piping cream into eclairs, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Clara holding a newspaper, a grin on her face. "Have you seen this?" she asked, handing it over. Letitia's heart skipped a beat as she unfolded the paper. There, on the front page of the business section, was an article titled "More Than a Bakery: Leticia Alves' Journey from Betrayal to Empowerment." Her fingers trembled slightly as she read the words, taking in how the journalist had captured her story, not just the hardships she had endured, but the way she had transformed them into something meaningful. She had never sought out recognition, but seeing her journey laid out like this made her realize just how far she had come. Livia joined them, skimming the article over Letitia's shoulder. "You know what this means, right?" she said, nudging her playfully. "This program isn't just a small-town initiative anymore. People are watching. They're inspired." Letitia exhaled, processing the weight of that truth. It wasn't just about her bakery anymore. The impact of what she had built was stretching beyond the walls of her shop, reaching people who had never even set foot inside. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "I just hope it helps someone," she murmured, folding the newspaper carefully. "If even one person reads this and realizes they don't have to settle for less, that they can rebuild no matter what they've been through, then it was worth it." That evening, after closing up, Letitia sat alone in the empty bakery, the quiet hum of the refrigerators the only sound in the room. She thought about the woman she had been not so long ago, the one who had questioned her worth, who had allowed herself to shrink under someone else's expectations. She had been so afraid of losing Enrique, of letting go of what she thought was love. But now, sitting in the space she had built with her own hands, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and hard work, she realized something important. She had never really lost anything. If anything, she had gained everything that truly mattered. The following days brought an unexpected wave of attention to Letitia and her bakery. Customers came not only for the pastries, but to meet the woman behind the story they had read about. Some shared their own struggles, telling her how her journey had inspired them to take control of their lives. Others asked if they could enroll in future apprenticeship programs, eager to learn from someone who had built success from resilience. Letitia welcomed them all, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never set out to be anyone's role model, but knowing that her experiences were helping others filled her with a sense of purpose deeper than she had ever imagined. One afternoon, as Letitia prepared a batch of dough, an older woman approached the counter. Her face was kind, her eyes warm with recognition. "You remind me so much of myself when I was younger," she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "I ran a small bakery for over 30 years. It was my whole world." Letitia wiped her hands on her apron and smiled. "That's wonderful. What made you stop?" The woman let out a soft sigh. "Life happens. My husband and I had different dreams, and I chose to follow his instead of mine. I thought that was love, but I look at you, and I see someone who chose herself, and that is something truly special." The words stayed with Letitia long after the woman had left. How many people had given up on their dreams for the sake of someone else? How many had settled for a life that didn't truly fulfill them, believing that love meant sacrifice? She had almost been one of them. Almost. But she had fought her way back, piece by piece. And now she stood on the other side of that battle, stronger, wiser, and unwilling to ever lose herself again. She glanced around her bakery, at the apprentices working diligently, at Clara chatting with a customer, at the shelves lined with fresh bread, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not just pride, but peace. That evening, Livia stopped by with a bottle of wine, waving it in the air with a grin. "I think it's time for another toast," she announced, pulling Letitia into a seat before she could protest. "To what?" Letitia asked, amused. Livia poured them each a glass and raised hers high. "To you, to choosing yourself, to proving that love should never come at the cost of your dreams." Letitia clinked her glass against Livia's, a slow smile spreading across her lips. She took a sip, letting the warmth settle inside her. She had spent so long searching for happiness, for success, for a sense of belonging. And now, sitting here surrounded by everything she had built, she realized she had found it. Not in someone else, not in validation from the outside world, but in herself. The next morning, Letitia arrived at the bakery earlier than usual, before the sun had fully risen, before the streets filled with life. There was something special about these quiet moments, standing alone in the space she had built, feeling the anticipation of a new day. She inhaled deeply, the familiar scent of flour and yeast grounding her, reminding her of how far she had come. Just months ago, she had been trapped in a life that made her feel small, uncertain of her own worth. Now every corner of this bakery, every loaf of bread, every smiling customer was proof that she had reclaimed herself. She had not just survived, she had flourished. As the morning rush began, Letitia moved through the bakery with effortless ease. The apprentices worked diligently, their confidence growing with each passing day. Clara managed the front with her usual charm, greeting customers like old friends. Livia sat in the corner, reviewing some financial reports, occasionally glancing up to give Letitia an approving nod. Everything was running smoothly. Yet Letitia couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting inside her. It wasn't restlessness. It was curiosity. She had built this bakery into something extraordinary, but for the first time, she wondered what else was out there for her. The thought lingered in her mind all afternoon. She wasn't unhappy, not at all. But she had spent so long fighting to get here that she hadn't considered what came after. Was this it? Was this the final chapter of her journey, or was there still more for her to explore? The idea both excited and terrified her. She loved this bakery, but she also knew that life had a way of pulling people toward new paths when they least expected it. Maybe, just maybe, there was something else waiting for her beyond these walls. And for the first time, she allowed herself to consider it. That evening, as Letitia closed up shop, she stood at the doorway, looking out into the city. The world felt wide open, full of possibilities she hadn't yet dared to chase. She smiled to herself, knowing that whatever came next, whether it was staying here and expanding further or stepping into something completely new, she was ready for it. She had learned how to stand on her own, how to trust herself, how to fight for the life she deserved. And no matter what the future held, one thing was certain: she would never let fear hold her back again. The idea of something new lingered in Letitia's mind over the next few days, growing stronger with each passing moment. It wasn't that she wanted to leave the bakery, far from it. This place was her heart, her foundation. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to wonder what else she was capable of. She had spent so long proving herself, overcoming adversity, rebuilding from nothing. Now, she wanted to see what she could create beyond the walls she had built. The thought wasn't rooted in dissatisfaction, but in the thrilling realization that she no longer had limits. She had already done what she once thought was impossible. What was stopping her from doing it again? One afternoon, while finalizing schedules with Clara, she hesitated before speaking. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. Clara glanced up, tilting her head. "For the bakery?" she asked. Letitia shook her head. "For me." Clara set her pen down, studying Letitia carefully before smiling. "I think you're finally letting yourself dream beyond this place," she said softly. "And that's a good thing." The words struck Letitia deeper than she expected. Dreaming beyond the bakery. It felt strange, almost disloyal, to consider something outside of what she had worked so hard to build. But wasn't that the point of growth? To keep evolving, to keep reaching? That evening, Letitia sat at her kitchen table, flipping through an old notebook filled with ideas she had once been too afraid to pursue. Opening a culinary school, writing a book about her journey, creating a network of bakeries that supported women entrepreneurs, dreams she had buried beneath the weight of past doubts. Now, they didn't feel so impossible. She traced her fingers over the faded ink, feeling the quiet hum of excitement she hadn't let herself acknowledge before. Maybe it was time to start thinking bigger, to push past the comfortable and embrace the unknown once again. The next day, as she walked into the bakery, she saw it with new eyes, not as the final destination, but as the beginning of something even greater. She would always love this place, but now she understood that she didn't have to be confined by it. She had built something incredible, something that would continue to thrive even if she explored new paths. And as she tied her apron and stepped into the kitchen, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to embrace it with the same determination that had brought her this far. That evening, as Letitia locked up the bakery, she lingered for a moment outside the door, staring at the sign that bore her name. It was strange to think that there had been a time when she doubted she could do this, when she believed her worth was tied to someone else's approval. Now, she saw things clearly. This place, this dream, was entirely hers. But instead of feeling like an endpoint, it felt like a stepping stone. The world was larger than she had allowed herself to believe, and for the first time, she was willing to see where it could take her. She walked through the quiet streets, her mind alive with possibilities. The thought of writing her story, of creating something beyond the bakery, both excited and terrified her. What if she failed? What if she stepped beyond her comfort zone only to realize she wasn't ready? But then she reminded herself she had already faced failure before, had lost everything and rebuilt from nothing. Fear was no longer something that controlled her. It was simply a reminder that she was stepping into something meaningful. And if there was one thing Letitia knew how to do, it was to face the unknown with courage. When she arrived home, she sat at her desk opening a blank notebook. The pages stretched before her, empty and full of possibility, much like her future. She wrote down the first thought that came to her, a story of resilience, of rebuilding, of never settling for less than you deserve. She didn't know if it would become a book, a speech, or simply a reminder to herself, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was allowing herself to dream again, to step beyond the life she had once fought to protect and into something even greater. As she closed the notebook and set it aside, she realized something profound. Her story wasn't ending. It was simply evolving. The bakery had been her rebirth, her sanctuary, her proof that she could stand on her own. But now, she was ready for the next chapter, whatever it might be. And as she turned off the light and headed to bed, she knew one thing for certain: she would never again be afraid of what came next. The morning air was crisp as Letitia stepped into the bakery, the scent of warm bread wrapping around her like an old friend. But today, something felt different. Not in the bakery itself. The ovens still glowed. The shelves were lined with golden pastries, and the apprentices moved with careful precision. No, the difference was in her. For the first time in years, she wasn't just focused on maintaining what she had built. She was thinking about what came next, about stepping into something unknown, about trusting herself enough to take another leap. And instead of fear, she felt something else entirely: excitement. As she tied her apron, Clara appeared beside her with a curious smile. "You're thinking about something," she observed. Letitia chuckled. "That obvious?" Clara nodded. "You get this look when you're planning something big." Letitia hesitated, then leaned against the counter, exhaling slowly. "I've been wondering if it's time for something new. Not to leave the bakery. I'll always love this place. But maybe it's time to expand in a different way. To share my story. To help others beyond these walls." Clara considered her words before nodding in understanding. "You mean writing, teaching, maybe even speaking?" Letitia hadn't voiced it aloud yet, but hearing it put into words made it real. "Maybe," she admitted. "I just know that I'm ready for more." Later that afternoon, Livia arrived, carrying a stack of business reports. "Numbers are looking great," she announced, setting the papers down. "You've built something solid, Letitia. The bakery's thriving. The apprenticeship program is taking off. You don't have to worry anymore." Letitia smiled, flipping through the reports, but her mind was elsewhere. "That's just it," she said. "For the first time, I don't feel like I have to fight to prove myself. And that makes me wonder, what else can I do?" Livia studied her for a moment, then grinned. "You know, I was waiting for this moment. You're not the type to stay in one place forever." That night, Letitia sat at her desk, opening the notebook she had started a few days ago. The pages were slowly filling with ideas, each one a possibility, a future waiting to unfold. She could start writing about her experiences, helping other women who felt trapped the way she once had. She could host workshops, teaching not just baking, but resilience, independence, and the power of self-worth. The bakery had given her everything. It had rebuilt her when she was at her lowest. But now she felt it deep in her bones. Her story wasn't meant to stay here. It was meant to be shared. The more Leticia allowed herself to think about the future, the more she realized how much she had been holding back. For so long, she had been focused on survival, on proving to herself, to the world, that she could succeed on her own. And she had. The bakery was thriving, the apprenticeship program was making a difference, and she was no longer haunted by the doubts that had once consumed her. But now, for the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was dreaming again. And this time, she wasn't afraid of where those dreams might take her. The next morning, as she worked alongside her apprentices, she observed them carefully. Each of them had come here looking for something. A skill, a fresh start, a chance to build a life they could be proud of. Watching them reminded her of her own journey, of the nights she had spent wondering if she was capable, if she was strong enough to build something meaningful. She had learned the hard way that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about getting back up, about choosing yourself even when the world told you not to. And now she wanted to teach that lesson beyond the walls of her bakery. During lunch, she sat with Livia and Clara, finally voicing what had been on her mind. "I think I want to write a book," she said simply, watching their reactions. Livia's eyes lit up immediately. "About your story?" she asked, already intrigued. Leticia nodded. "About everything. About resilience. About learning to believe in yourself. About knowing when to walk away from things that don't serve you anymore." Clara grinned. "I'd read that in a heartbeat," she said. "But more than that, I think a lot of people need to hear it." The support warmed Leticia more than she had expected. She had hesitated to say the words out loud, fearing they would sound foolish. But now that they were spoken, they felt right. That evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, she opened her notebook and wrote the first sentence of what could be her book. "The hardest lesson I ever learned was that love should never make you feel small." She stared at the words for a moment, letting them sink in, feeling the weight of the truth they carried. She didn't know where this new path would take her, but that no longer scared her. She had started over before, and she could do it again. And as she continued writing, she realized something. This wasn't just a new project. It was another way to reclaim her voice, to tell her story on her own terms. And for Leticia, that was the most powerful thing of all. The more Leticia wrote, the more she felt herself reconnecting with pieces of her past that she had long buried. Each page carried a part of her journey, the doubts that had once paralyzed her, the heartbreak that nearly broke her, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding herself. But as she wrote, she realized something unexpected. This wasn't just a story about loss or betrayal. It was a story about resilience, about finding the courage to start over, about learning that sometimes the hardest endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. She wasn't writing from a place of pain anymore. She was writing from a place of strength. A few weeks into her writing process, she shared a draft of one of the chapters with Livia and Clara. They sat in the back of the bakery after closing, sipping coffee as they read in silence. Leticia tried to keep herself calm, but her fingers fidgeted against the rim of her cup. When they finally looked up, their expressions said everything. "This is powerful," Livia said, her voice filled with admiration. "You're not just telling your story, you're giving people hope." Clara nodded. "It's like you're reminding people that they can take control of their lives, no matter how lost they feel." Leticia exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. She had worried that her story was too personal, too raw. But hearing their words, she knew she was on the right path. Inspired by their encouragement, Leticia kept writing, dedicating time each evening to pour her thoughts onto the page. The bakery remained her heart, but writing became her new sanctuary, a place where she could process everything she had been through and transform it into something meaningful. She wrote about the early days of her business, about the moments she almost gave up, about the people who had lifted her when she couldn't stand on her own. But more than anything, she wrote about what it meant to reclaim yourself after being made to feel small. And the more she wrote, the more she realized this wasn't just a book. It was a testament to the life she had built, to the woman she had become. One evening, as she reviewed the chapters she had completed, she received an unexpected email. A journalist who had previously written about her bakery was reaching out again, this time wanting to do a deeper feature on her personal journey, her struggles, her business, and now, her book. Letitia stared at the screen, her heart pounding. A part of her still hesitated at the idea of sharing so much with the world, but then she reminded herself she had spent years shrinking herself to make others comfortable. She wasn't going to do that anymore. Taking a deep breath, she typed her response. "I'd love to share my story." And just like that, she took another step forward into a future she was no longer afraid of. The week leading up to the interview felt like a whirlwind. Letitia continued writing whenever she could, pouring her heart into each chapter, but now there was a new layer of vulnerability added to it all. The thought of sharing her story in such a public way was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had spent so much time keeping her pain private, healing in silence, proving herself through actions rather than words. But now she was about to let the world in, to let them see not just the success, but the struggle that had come before it. And yet deep down, she knew this was the right thing to do. If even one person saw themselves in her story and found the strength to take back their own life, it would all be worth it. On the day of the interview, Letitia arrived at the bakery early, needing the comfort of her space before stepping into something unfamiliar. She moved through the kitchen with purpose, kneading dough, shaping pastries, letting the rhythm of the work steady her nerves. Clara and Livia arrived soon after, offering words of encouragement. "You're ready for this?" Livia assured her, squeezing her shoulder. "This is just another way of doing what you've always done, helping people." Letitia nodded, exhaling slowly. It was true. The bakery had always been her way of reaching others, of healing through creation. Now, her words would do the same. When the journalist arrived, a warm-looking woman named Sophia, Letitia felt her initial nervousness ease. They sat at one of the bakery's wooden tables, cups of coffee between them, as the interview began. At first, Sophia asked about the bakery, its beginnings, its growth, the apprenticeship program. Letitia answered easily, speaking with pride about everything she had built. But then, the questions shifted. "When you walked away from your past, did you ever think you'd end up here?" Sophia asked gently, her eyes searching for something deeper. Letitia hesitated for only a moment before answering. "No," she admitted. "Back then, I thought leaving meant losing everything. I didn't realize I was actually gaining myself." The conversation flowed naturally from there, touching on resilience, healing, and the power of rebuilding. Letitia spoke about the nights she doubted herself, about the moments she had almost given up, and about the people who had helped her along the way. She shared what she wished she had known earlier, that no dream, no relationship, no amount of love should ever require you to make yourself smaller. And as she spoke, she saw something in Sophia's expression, a recognition, an understanding. It reminded her why she had agreed to do this in the first place. Stories had power, and hers, for the first time, was finally being told in full. By the time the interview ended, Letitia felt lighter, as if a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying had been lifted. Sophia thanked her for her honesty, assuring her that stories like hers had the power to inspire real change. "There are so many people who need to hear this," Sophia said, as she packed up her notes. "Your journey isn't just about success. It's about resilience, about knowing your worth. And that's something people need to be reminded of." Letitia smiled, feeling the truth in those words. She had once believed her story was only about survival, about escaping something toxic. But now she saw it for what it really was. A story of self-discovery, of transformation, of choosing herself above all else. As Sophia left, Livia and Clara sat with Letitia, both of them watching her carefully. "How do you feel?" Clara asked, tilting her head. Letitia thought for a moment before answering. "Strangely free," she admitted. "For so long I held on to the idea that my past was something to hide, something to overcome. But now I see that it's part of my strength. Without everything that happened, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be this version of myself." Livia grinned. "Exactly. And now, instead of running from it, you're using it to help others. That's power, Letitia." The words settled deep in her chest, filling her with a sense of purpose even stronger than before. That night, as she closed the bakery, she took a moment to stand at the entrance, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She had spent so long thinking this bakery was the final destination, the ultimate proof of her independence. But now, she understood. It was only the beginning. Her story wasn't finished. If anything, it was expanding in ways she had never imagined. Writing, mentoring, speaking. She had no idea exactly where this path would lead, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was ready to embrace it. Letitia locked the doors and walked home under the cool night sky, her heart steady, her mind filled with new dreams. She thought about the girl she had once been, the one who had doubted her worth, who had allowed someone else to define her limits. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had reclaimed everything, who had built a life on her own terms. And as she stepped into the quiet of her home, she smiled to herself, knowing that whatever came next, she was finally, undeniably, free. The morning after the interview, Letitia stepped into the bakery with a renewed sense of clarity. She had always known this place was special, but now she saw it as something more than just a business. It was a foundation, a launching pad for everything she wanted to do next. As she moved through the kitchen, checking on the apprentices and adjusting trays of fresh bread, she felt an undeniable shift within herself. She wasn't just a business owner anymore. She was a mentor, a storyteller, and someone who had the power to inspire others to take control of their own lives. And for the first time, she truly embraced that role. As the morning rush began, customers filled the bakery, many of them bringing up the interview. "I read your story," one woman said warmly, as Letitia handed her a box of pastries. "You don't know how much I needed to hear that. Sometimes we forget we're allowed to start over." Letitia smiled, feeling the weight of the woman's words. That was exactly why she had shared her journey, to remind people that no matter how lost they felt, no matter how much they had been made to believe they weren't enough, they could always rebuild. They could always choose themselves. And seeing that message resonate with others made every difficult moment of her past feel like it had led her to this purpose. Later that afternoon, Livia arrived with a mischievous grin, holding up her phone. "You've gone viral," she announced, dropping into the chair across from Letitia. "The interview has been shared all over social media, and people are reaching out. Some want to feature you in magazines. Others are asking if you do speaking engagements." Letitia blinked, taken aback. "Speaking engagements?" she repeated, as if the idea was completely foreign to her. Livia laughed. "Yes, Letitia, people want to hear more from you. You're not just a baker anymore. You're a voice people are listening to." The words sent a thrill of nervous excitement through her. She had never seen herself as someone who spoke on stages, who stood in front of crowds sharing her journey. But then again, she had never imagined herself as a woman who would walk away from everything and build a new life from scratch. And yet, here she was. That evening, as she sat at her desk, staring at the endless messages flooding in, she felt the undeniable pull of something bigger. Maybe it was time to step beyond the bakery, to take her story beyond the walls of this place and bring it to those who needed to hear it. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and completely outside of her comfort zone. But if there was one thing Letitia had learned, it was that the best things in life often came from the moments that scared you the most. And as she drafted a response to one of the event organizers who had reached out, she knew she was ready for this next step. The days that followed were unlike anything Letitia had ever experienced. She was used to managing the controlled chaos of a busy bakery, but now she found herself navigating an entirely new world. Emails from journalists, invitations to speak at events, messages from strangers who had read her story and saw themselves in her journey. It was overwhelming, exciting, and slightly terrifying all at once. But instead of shrinking away from it, she embraced it. She had spent too long letting fear dictate her choices. Now she was making decisions based on possibility, not doubt, and that alone felt like a victory. One afternoon, as she rolled out dough in the kitchen, Livia appeared in the doorway, waving a printed email in the air. "You're not going to believe this," she said, grinning. Letitia wiped flour from her hands before taking the paper, scanning the contents quickly. It was an invitation to speak at a national business conference, a gathering of entrepreneurs, leaders, and creatives from all over the country. "They want you to share your journey as a keynote speaker," Livia added. Letitia's heart pounded. She had imagined small speaking engagements, maybe local panels, but this was bigger than anything she had anticipated. She sat down, rereading the invitation, her mind racing. "Do you think I can do this?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. Livia crossed her arms and gave her a pointed look. "Letitia, you've rebuilt your life from the ground up. You've faced betrayal, started over, built a thriving business, and now you're mentoring others to do the same. If that's not something worth sharing on a big stage, I don't know what is." Letitia exhaled, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Livia was right. Every challenge she had overcome, every fear she had faced had led her to this moment, and she wasn't about to let old insecurities hold her back now. That evening, after the bakery had closed and the city had settled into a quiet hum, Letitia sat at her desk and crafted her response. "I would be honored to share my journey," she typed, her fingers steady on the keyboard. As she hit send, a thrill of anticipation coursed through her. This was a leap into the unknown, a step into a future she had never envisioned for herself. But if there was one thing she had learned, it was that sometimes the best things in life happened when you dared to take a chance. And as she leaned back in her chair, she realized that this wasn't just another step forward. It was the start of something entirely new. As the day of the conference approached, Letitia found herself balancing two worlds: the comfort of her bakery, where she felt in control, and the unfamiliar territory of public speaking, where she was stepping into something entirely new. She spent nights refining her speech, jotting down notes, rehearsing in front of a mirror. But no matter how much she prepared, a part of her couldn't shake the nervous energy buzzing beneath the surface. It wasn't fear of failure. She had faced much worse. It was the weight of knowing that her words, her story, could impact people in ways she hadn't anticipated. And that responsibility both thrilled and humbled her. One afternoon, as she tested a new pastry recipe, Clara watched her with a knowing smirk. "You're kneading that dough like it personally offended you," she teased. Letitia let out a breathy laugh, shaking her head. "I guess I'm just anxious," she admitted. "I keep wondering if I'm really the right person to be up there, speaking to a room full of business leaders." Clara set down a tray and leaned against the counter. "Letitia, those people want to hear from someone real. You didn't inherit success. You built it from nothing. You didn't follow a perfect plan. You fought for every step. That's what makes your story powerful." Letitia let the words sink in, the truth of them settling in her chest. Maybe she wasn't the most polished speaker, but she was someone who had lived through the struggle, and maybe that was exactly what people needed to hear. The night before the event, Letitia sat alone in her apartment, her speech printed out in front of her. She traced the words with her fingertips, remembering the woman she had been when this journey first began, the one who had silenced herself to make someone else feel bigger, the one who had questioned if she was strong enough, capable enough. That woman no longer existed. And now she had the chance to stand in front of an audience and prove, not just to them but to herself, that she had grown into someone unbreakable. She folded the speech carefully and placed it in her bag, her decision made. She wasn't just going to speak at the conference, she was going to own her story. The next morning, as she boarded the flight to the event, a sense of calm settled over her. She wasn't running away from something anymore. She was running towards something greater. And as the plane lifted off, she gazed out the window, feeling a certainty she hadn't known before. No matter what happened next, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The conference hall was larger than Letitia had imagined, its high ceilings and rows of neatly arranged chairs making her feel smaller than she had in a long time. She stood backstage, clutching the note card she had prepared, listening to the low hum of conversation from the audience. Business leaders, entrepreneurs, aspiring professionals, they had all gathered here to hear stories of success, of struggle, of resilience. And soon, she would stand in front of them, not as the woman who had once doubted herself, but as someone who had fought for everything she had built. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. She had earned this moment. A staff member gave her a reassuring nod, signaling that it was almost time for her to go on stage. Livia, who had insisted on traveling with her for support, squeezed her shoulder. "This is just another kitchen," she said, grinning, "and you're just teaching another recipe. Only this time, the recipe is your story." Letitia let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "A little different from baking croissants," she muttered, but the words still comforted her. She had spent years creating something from nothing, turning raw ingredients into something warm, something meaningful. And now she was doing the same with her life. The announcer introduced her, and as she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded her. But then, as she looked out at the audience, something shifted inside her. She saw faces waiting to hear her words, people who might be in the same place she had once been, doubting, struggling, wondering if they had the strength to start over. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about reaching them, about reminding them that they weren't alone. She took a breath, feeling the weight of her journey settle in her chest, and then she spoke. "The hardest lesson I ever learned was that love should never make you feel small," she began, her voice strong and steady. As she continued, she shared the truth of her journey, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the moment she almost gave up. But more importantly, she spoke about the rise after the fall, the strength she had discovered within herself, the way she had rebuilt not just a business, but a life. She wasn't just telling a story. She was giving the audience a mirror, showing them that no matter how lost they felt, they had the power to begin again. And as she reached the final words of her speech, the room was silent, hanging onto every syllable. When she finally finished, the applause started slowly, then grew into something thunderous, something undeniable. And in that moment, Letitia knew this was only the beginning of something even greater. As the applause echoed through the hall, Letitia stood still for a moment, absorbing the energy of the crowd. It wasn't just about the claps or the standing ovation. It was about what it meant. Every person in that room had connected with something in her story. They had seen themselves in her struggles, in her doubts, in the quiet strength it took to rebuild. She had once believed she was alone in her pain, that no one could truly understand what it felt like to lose yourself and fight to regain control. But standing on that stage, she realized how wrong she had been. People weren't just listening to her story, they were feeling it. After stepping off stage, Letitia was immediately greeted by attendees who wanted to thank her, to share their own experiences, to tell her how much her words had meant to them. A young woman, barely in her 20s, gripped Letitia's hands tightly, her eyes brimming with emotion. "I was in a relationship like the one you described," she confessed. "I thought I wasn't strong enough to leave, but hearing you today, it made me believe that I can." Letitia felt her throat tighten, overwhelmed by the raw honesty in the young woman's voice. This was why she had done it. If her pain, her journey, could help even one person take back their life, then everything she had endured had been worth it. Later that evening, as she sat in her hotel room overlooking the city, Letitia reflected on how much had changed. Just a year ago, she had been convinced that her world was falling apart. She had believed that love required sacrifice, that to be accepted, she had to make herself smaller. But she had been wrong. Love, real love, whether for a person, a passion, or for oneself, should never require you to dim your own light. She had spent so much time believing she had to prove her worth to others, when all along she only needed to prove it to herself. And now, she had. As she opened her laptop, she saw an email from a publishing company interested in her book idea. She stared at the screen, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her face. One door had led to another, and then another, until suddenly her world was wider than she had ever imagined. The bakery had been her foundation, but her story was meant to reach beyond it. And as she typed her response, agreeing to a meeting with the publisher, she knew with absolute certainty her journey wasn't just about where she had been, it was about where she was going. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next.